Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
The monarchy had survived scandals, separations, funerals, interviews, and decades of whispered pain. But nothing prepared the palace for the moment William stepped forward with a private letter connected to Diana and placed it at the center of the royal story. One page, one memory, one decision. And by the time Charles read what his son had revealed, the king was left devastated. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The pressure had been building long before that folder reached the king's hands. Inside the monarchy, which means the royal family and the system of duty built around them, old questions had started rising again. Diana's legacy was no longer just a memory people honored on anniversaries. It had become a wound. William knew it. Charles feared it. And the palace, the working center of royal decisions and image, could feel the past moving closer with every quiet conversation. William sat alone inside Kensington Palace, the royal residence long tied to Diana's life and to his own childhood grief. The letter rested before him, sealed away for years, yet suddenly heavier than anything in the room. He did not touch it at first. He only looked at it, as if the paper itself might speak before he was ready. The prince understood what this meant. If he kept Diana's words hidden, he protected his father from pain. If he revealed them, he protected his mother from being softened into silence. Diana had written with the kind of honesty the palace had never known how to handle. Her words carried fear for her sons, sorrow over the emotional cost of royal duty, and a painful belief that Charles had failed to shield the family from private suffering. William read the lines again and felt the old conflict return. He loved his father, but he had also spent a lifetime carrying his mother's absence like a second heartbeat. Charles received the sealed folder without knowing how deeply it would cut. The king opened it slowly, expecting history, perhaps sadness, perhaps another reminder of a life that still followed him through every corridor. Then he read the first lines. His face changed, his hand lowered. The monarch sat back as if Diana had entered the room through the page itself. The letter was not a public attack. That made it worse. It was intimate. It was controlled. It was impossible to dismiss. Charles could answer critics, manage headlines, and survive royal storms, but he could not easily defend himself against the private words of the woman whose memory still belonged to millions. William had dropped the bombshell with full knowledge of what it would do. The prince had not shouted. He had not demanded a spectacle. He had simply placed Diana's voice where Charles could no longer avoid it. And when the king finally closed the folder without speaking, one question took over the silence. Why now? But before the king could answer the letter, the palace had to confront the people trapped inside its shadow. This was never only about a letter. It was about a son who had carried silence for too long, a father who had spent decades learning how to survive regret, and a woman whose absence still commanded the room. Diana was gone, but in that moment her words moved through the palace like a living force, separating William from Charles more sharply than any public scandal ever could. William stood outside the king's private room, with one hand gripping the back of a chair, and for a few seconds he did not move. The prince had faced cameras, ceremonies, grief, pressure, and duty. Yet this felt different. This was not a public role. This was not a royal appearance. This was a son, deciding whether to speak with the control expected of a future king, or with the pain of a boy who had lost his mother too soon. Charles waited inside, already sensing the weight of what was coming. The king had spent years carrying history on his shoulders, and history was not gentle with him. A monarch is the ruling king or queen, the person expected to represent continuity, even when private life is breaking behind closed doors. That mattered because Charles could not react like an ordinary father. Every word he spoke would carry the burden of the crown, and every silence would sound like an admission. William entered slowly, and the air between them tightened. The prince looked at his father, then at the letter, and the choice inside him became sharper. Diana had left him more than memory. She had left him a truth that still burned through the polish of royal life. He had inherited the monarchy from Charles, but he had inherited emotional honesty from his mother, and those two legacies were now standing against each other in the same room. Charles watched his son's face and knew this was not politics. The king had seen William angry before, wounded before, guarded before, but this was something deeper. This was restraint, fighting with heartbreak. The future king did not raise his voice. He did not accuse his father at first. He simply held the letter as if it were both evidence and ache, both a message from Diana and a mirror Charles had avoided for too long. William finally spoke of the underlined passage. Diana had written that her sons might one day be forced to choose between public duty and private truth, and the sentence struck the prince with brutal force. He knew exactly what it meant. For years, he had protected the institution by controlling his pain. Now that same pain was asking him to protect his mother. Charles noticed the line and felt the room shift. The king understood that William had not brought the letter for comfort. He had brought it for accountability. And though Camilla's name was never spoken in that first exchange, her presence moved through every pause, every careful breath, every word left unsaid. And to understand why William finally acted, the palace had to return to the moment when silence stopped being possible. Every royal crisis has a beginning that looks harmless at first. A ceremony, a seating plan, a private remark, a small decision made behind polished doors. But this time, one moment became the trigger everyone later remembered. It was not a speech or a scandalous interview. It was a quiet royal ceremony where Diana's memory was handled so coldly that William finally decided the past could no longer stay locked away. William had felt the tension building for weeks. Diana's name still carried warmth in public, but inside royal planning rooms, it was often handled with caution, trimmed into safe lines and gentle memories. A commemorative ceremony means a formal event held to honor someone or something important, and this one was supposed to honor Diana at Kensington Palace. That mattered because Kensington was not just a royal residence. It was the place most closely tied to her life, her sorrow, and the sons she left behind. The prince arrived expecting a tribute with weight. He had approved wording that spoke of Diana's compassion, her loneliness, and the price she paid for being loved by the public while feeling unheard in private. Then, moments before the ceremony began, a revised copy reached his hand. The tribute had been shortened. The sharp edges were gone. Her suffering had been softened into polite praise. Her truth had been turned into decoration. William read the changes once, then again. His jaw tightened, but he did not explode. That was what made it worse. The future king had learned control from years inside the monarchy, but he had learned emotional truth from Diana. In that instant, those two lessons collided. He looked across the room and saw Charles watching him. The king understood immediately that something had gone wrong, but he understood too late how deeply the change had cut. Charles tried to hold his composure. He knew why the tribute had been softened. The palace wanted peace. The king wanted the past handled carefully. No one wanted old wounds reopened in front of family, staff, and invited guests. But William saw something colder beneath that caution. He saw the same pattern Diana had feared, the same habit of remembering her beauty while removing her pain. The ceremony moved forward, but the prince was no longer fully inside it. Every gentle phrase sounded unfinished. Every respectful pause felt like an erasure. Charles glanced at his son more than once, and each time the silence between them grew heavier. The king could see the future monarch standing there, calm on the outside, wounded underneath, and he knew the room had shifted. William returned later to the private archive box connected to Diana. An archive box is simply a protected container used to preserve important personal records, letters, or family papers. He opened it slowly, not as a prince looking through history, but as a son searching for the truth that had just been denied. Then he found the letter again. Diana's words struck harder this time. She had feared the palace would remember her smile while erasing her suffering. She had feared her sons would one day be asked to choose between duty and truth. William sat with that sentence until the room felt smaller around him. By midnight, the decision was made. Charles would read the letter. Not through aides, not through a statement, not through another softened version of the past. He would read it from William's hands. That decision led father and son toward the confrontation the palace had feared for years. There are royal conversations that never reach the public record, but change everything behind the crown. This was one of them. No cameras, no courtiers speaking over the silence, no polished statement waiting outside the door. Just William, Charles, and Diana's letter between them. And when the prince finally spoke, the king did not hear accusation first. He heard grief. William entered the private sitting room at Clarence House, with the folder held firmly in one hand. Clarence House is a royal residence in London, often used for private meetings and official work. And that mattered because this was not a grand public stage. It was a controlled room meant for controlled conversations. But nothing about this moment felt controlled. The prince asked for the aides to leave. Charles looked at him for a long second before nodding, and the door closed with a sound that made the silence feel permanent. The folder rested on a small table between them. It looked simple, almost harmless, but both men knew it had already changed the air. A private letter is personal writing meant for one person or a small circle, not a public statement, and that made Diana's words more dangerous. They had not been shaped for cameras. They had not been polished for history. They were raw. They were intimate. They belonged to a mother who feared what duty might do to her sons. Charles sat back, but his eyes stayed on the folder. The king had faced arguments before. He had faced anger. He had faced judgment from the world. But William's stillness unsettled him more than fury would have. The prince was not acting like a rebel. He was acting like a man who had reached the end of patience. That difference made the room colder. William told his father that Diana's words were not meant to punish him. The prince said it carefully, almost gently, because he knew every sentence could cut. But he also said the words could no longer be ignored by the family she left behind. Charles looked down as if the floor might give him a safer answer. The king wanted to speak, yet the old defenses did not come quickly enough. William's voice changed when he admitted he had spent years protecting his father's feelings while privately carrying his mother's pain. That sentence broke something. Charles blinked hard. His face tightened. The monarch had expected blame, but he had not expected his son to describe love as a burden. He had not expected to hear that silence had been another kind of inheritance. William opened the folder and read one passage aloud. Diana had feared her sons would inherit a palace skilled at silence but poor at healing. The prince paused after the sentence, letting it stand between them without mercy. Charles heard more than the words. He heard the years behind them. He heard the boy William had been. He heard the mother who was no longer there to defend herself. Charles reached toward the letter. Then he stopped. His hand hovered for a breath, as if touching the paper would make the past too real to survive. The king pulled back slowly, and William watched him with pain instead of victory. That was the cruelest part. No one in that room had won. The confrontation did not end with shouting. It ended with Charles looking at the folder, then at his son, and asking one quiet question. Who else has seen it? That question transformed the letter from a family wound into a struggle for control. A royal letter is never just paper, when it carries the voice of someone the nation still mourns. Inside the palace, the question became dangerous at once. Who controlled Diana's memory? Who had the right to decide what remained private? And who would be damaged if the truth escaped the family walls? For William, the answer was emotional. For Charles, it was devastatingly royal. Charles sat at the head of the table, but he did not look like a man in command. The king's hands rested still before him, and the silence around him felt heavier than any argument. A senior aide placed a briefing note nearby, but Charles barely glanced at it. The words William had read aloud still rang inside him. Diana's fear, Diana's pain, Diana's warning. The monarch could survive criticism from strangers, but his son had brought him something far more painful, a truth from inside the family. William stood apart from the palace machinery gathering around the crisis. The prince knew what was happening. A royal household briefing means a private meeting where advisors discuss family duties, public image, and possible responses before anything reaches the outside world. That mattered because these briefings could turn human pain into careful language. They could take a wound and call it a matter. They could take Diana's voice and reduce it to a problem that needed handling. The palace divided almost immediately. Some saw the letter as a private family matter, something that belonged between Charles, William, and the memory of the woman who had written it. Others understood the danger more sharply. If Diana's words became known, even in fragments, they could reshape how people saw the king, the prince, and the whole emotional history of the monarchy. This was not only about the past, it was about who would be trusted with the future. Charles listened as aides spoke around him, but the king seemed trapped in the room where William had read the passage aloud. One advisor warned that even a single leaked line could reopen questions the institution had spent decades trying to settle. Another courtier said the public would not hear the letter as history. They would hear it as Diana speaking again. Charles lowered his eyes at that, because he knew it was true. William refused to let the discussion become cold. The prince interrupted softly, but the force behind his words changed the room. He said Diana was not a communications issue. She was not an anniversary tribute. She was not a sentence to be edited until everyone felt safe. She was his mother, And if the palace had failed to understand that before, it would understand it now. Charles looked at his son then, and the pain between them sharpened. The king saw that William was no longer asking permission to protect Diana's memory. The future king had found a kind of power no title could give him. A title is an official royal name or rank, but moral power comes from what people believe is right. And in that room, William's claim was stronger than any position on paper. One courtier quietly noted what everyone feared. The prince's possession of the letter gave him authority no office could match, because he was not speaking as a politician, an heir, or a strategist. He was speaking as Diana's son. That made him almost impossible to challenge without making the palace look cruel. Charles finally made his decision. The letter must remain sealed. No copies. No public statement about its contents. No soft briefing given to friendly voices. But William's face did not change, and that frightened the king more than open defiance. The prince had heard the order, yet something in him had already moved beyond obedience. And the moment William resisted, the fallout began moving through the palace faster than anyone could contain. The first shock was private. The second was institutional. Doors closed harder. Aides spoke more quietly. Long-serving staff watched familiar faces change. Diana's name had always carried power inside the royal household, but now it carried accusation, grief, and consequence. By morning, the palace was no longer managing a memory. It was managing a rupture between the king and the son who would one day replace him. Aides moved quickly, but no one moved with confidence. Drafts were prepared, revised, and quietly withdrawn before they ever reached a final page. A response option is the controlled language the palace prepares when a sensitive matter could become public, and that mattered because one wrong phrase could make the family look cold. Everyone understood the danger. Charles could not challenge the letter without appearing to challenge Diana's pain, and William could not be dismissed without making the monarchy seem blind to a son's grief. Camilla sat alone after hearing that the letter had been discussed directly between father and son. The queen consort did not ask for every detail at first. She did not need to. Diana's name had returned to the center of the royal story, and that alone was enough to tighten the air around her. Camilla knew the past had never truly left. It had only waited for the right door to open again. Charles walked into a scheduled briefing and lasted only minutes. The king listened as one aide began explaining possible language for a private family matter, but his face hardened at the phrase. He set his pen down with careful force. Not anger, not panic, something worse. Exhaustion. Then he told the aide he needed time before facing anyone. The monarch rose slowly, and the room understood that this was no ordinary royal problem. William, meanwhile, had not threatened publication. The prince had not said he would release Diana's words to the world. That made his position harder to attack. He was not creating a spectacle, he was creating a boundary. Word spread quietly that the future king had made one thing clear. Diana's truth would now shape how he handled family decisions, public honors, private ceremonies, and any attempt to use her memory only when convenient. A private note from Kensington Palace reached Charles before the afternoon ended. A private note is a direct written message sent between royal households, and this one carried the weight of a warning without sounding like a threat. William would not allow Diana's memory to be used selectively again. The line was simple. The impact was brutal. Charles read it once, then again, as if the meaning might soften if he gave it time. Camilla heard about the note soon after, and the queen consort understood what it meant for her place in the story. Diana was no longer just a shadow from the past. She had become a standard William was willing to defend in the present. Camilla remained still, but the silence around her changed. It was not fear exactly. It was the feeling of history moving without asking permission. Charles finally realized the letter itself was no longer the only issue. The king had been asking who had seen it, who might speak of it, who might leak it. But the deeper question had already taken control. Had William finally stepped out from under his father's version of history? But the true turning point did not come from aides, statements, or strategy. It came in a room where father and son finally stood without protection. Some royal turning points arrive with trumpets. This one arrived in silence. William did not need a council, a speech, or a public platform. He needed only one final private meeting with Charles, away from advisors and away from the machinery that had protected the monarchy for generations. In that room, the prince did not rebel. He did something more powerful. He stopped asking permission to remember his mother honestly. William returned to see the king without the folder in his hand. That alone changed everything. Charles had expected the letter to appear again, expected another page placed between them like a blade, expected another painful reading from Diana's own words. But the prince carried nothing. No document, no prepared statement, no visible proof. He had come with only the truth the letter had awakened. Charles watched him enter and understood the difference at once. A private settlement means an agreement reached quietly between people involved, without turning it into a public fight. And that mattered because both men knew the monarchy could not survive every family wound being opened before the world. But William was not there to bargain away Diana's meaning. He was there to decide how that meaning would live from now on. William spoke first, and his voice stayed low. He told his father that Diana was not a royal symbol to be lifted up when useful, and softened when uncomfortable. She had been a mother. She had laughed, suffered, feared, protected, and broken under pressure that the family still did not fully admit. The prince did not say this to wound Charles. He said it because the old silence had started to feel like another betrayal. Charles did not interrupt. The king sat with visible pain, and for once the defenses did not rise. He did not explain the past. He did not correct the emotion in his son's voice. He did not reach for the familiar language of duty, service, or survival. He only listened. That silence was different from the silence before. This one did not hide. This one absorbed. William then revealed his decision. The letter would remain private. Diana's exact words would not be released, copied, or used as a weapon against the king. But its meaning would no longer be locked away. The prince made clear that future family tributes, private ceremonies, and public honors would not erase her suffering to make everyone comfortable. Diana would be remembered whole, or she would not be used at all. Charles felt the consequence immediately. The monarchy had titles, offices, advisors, and rules. But William had claimed something stronger. Guardianship means the responsibility to protect someone's memory, interest, or legacy. And the prince had taken guardianship over Diana's story without asking for permission. He did not need a title for it. He had the bond of a son. The king looked older in that moment, not defeated, but changed. Charles understood that William was not trying to destroy him. That made it harder. The prince was drawing a line with sadness, not hatred. He was telling his father that family peace could no longer depend on forgetting what Diana endured. He was saying that love without honesty had cost them too much already. William left the room without triumph. Charles remained seated after the door closed, carrying the weight of what had been settled and what had been lost. For a few hours, the agreement held in silence. Then the outside world began to feel the tremor. And once the world felt that tremor, Diana's name moved from palace whispers to public judgment. The palace said very little. That was the mistake. Because silence, when Diana is involved, never stays empty. It fills with memory. It fills with suspicion. It fills with grief. The public never fully surrendered. By the next morning, Britain was not merely reacting to a royal dispute. It was watching a son defend his mother's place in history, and the nation understood the pain without needing every word of the letter. The statement arrived with careful language and almost no warmth. It spoke of private family matters, respect, and continued duty, but it did not say enough to calm anyone. A palace statement is an official message released to guide public understanding, and this one mattered because every missing detail felt louder than the words included. People did not need the full letter to understand the wound. They only needed to know William had placed Diana's voice before Charles, and that the king had been shaken by it. Broadcasters moved quickly, and the story hardened into something larger than a family disagreement. One evening program framed it as the emotional test of Charles's reign, not a dispute over an old document. That mattered because the monarchy survives not only through rules, but through public belief. If people felt William was defending truth while Charles was protecting silence, the balance of sympathy would move with brutal speed. At Kensington Palace gates, the public gave the moment a shape no statement could control. A small crowd gathered with white flowers, folded cards, and quiet faces. One handwritten note read, "A mother's voice never dies." Kensington Palace is the royal residence deeply connected to Diana's life, and that connection made the gathering more than a tribute. It became a message. People were not just remembering her. They were standing beside her son. William saw the coverage in a quiet room and lowered his gaze. The prince did not smile. He did not look proud. He looked struck by the force of it. For years, Diana's memory had belonged to the nation in a way no palace office could fully manage. Now the future king understood that his private choice had touched a public nerve that had never healed. The people had heard silence before. This time they heard resistance. Charles watched the same story from another room, and the king seemed to shrink into the stillness around him. A newspaper front page appeared the next morning with a stark image of Diana beside the headline, "The Letter That Shook the Crown." The crown means the monarchy as an institution, not only the person wearing the crown. And that headline mattered because it turned a family letter into a national judgment. One broadcaster captured the mood in a single line. "This is not about reopening the past. This is about who gets to define it." Charles heard those words and understood the danger. William had not released Diana's letter, but the meaning had escaped anyway. The prince had not accused his father in public, yet the country had filled in the silence with memory, sorrow, and instinctive loyalty. Camilla heard the coverage too, and the queen consort knew Diana's name had returned with a force no palace plan could soften. William remained silent, Charles remained wounded, and the public kept watching. By the end of that night, the king knew the final judgment would not come from courtiers. The verdict would come from the only place the monarchy could not fully command: memory itself. In the end, the bombshell was not that a letter existed. It was that William chose to let it matter. He did not use Diana's words to burn the monarchy down. He used them to draw a line through its heart. On one side stood silence, protection, and old royal survival. On the other stood memory, accountability, and a son who refused to let his mother be softened into myth. William understood the price of that choice. The prince had not wanted victory over Charles. He had wanted honesty where silence had ruled for too long. The palace, meaning the royal household, and the system that manages duty, image, and tradition, began to settle into a new understanding. Diana's legacy could no longer be handled only through careful statements, anniversaries, or gentle tributes. That mattered because every softened memory had left something unfinished, and every unfinished truth had returned stronger. Charles felt the change more painfully than anyone. The king was left devastated not because his son had betrayed him, but because the letter forced him to face what William had carried alone. For years, the monarch had lived with regret in private and dignity in public. Now those two worlds had collided. He could no longer tell himself that time had settled everything. Time had only taught his son how to speak calmly about a wound that had never closed. William felt no triumph. The future king knew that defending Diana's voice had deepened the distance between father and son, even as it healed something inside him. He had protected his mother without releasing every word. He had challenged Charles without trying to destroy him. And that balance made the moment even more powerful. The prince had shown that loyalty to the crown did not have to mean surrendering loyalty to the truth. Charles came to understand the final meaning of the letter in private. Diana had not written to weaken the crown, which means the monarchy as an institution, rather than only the person wearing it. She had written as a mother, afraid that love without honesty would collapse under ceremony. That truth reached the king slowly, then completely. The monarch could not change the past, but he could no longer hide behind it. William's bombshell letter did not destroy Charles, but it changed him. It did not return Diana, but it restored her voice. It did not break the monarchy, but forced it to remember that behind every crown is a family still answering for its choices. The final verdict was clear. Diana's memory had stopped being something the palace could simply arrange, soften, or control. It had become William's truth to protect, and he had protected it with sorrow, strength, and unshakable love. This was the moment Diana's memory stopped being handled by the palace and became, finally and completely, William's truth to protect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.